The Harbor rework is coming next week, so I thought we would preempt that by talking about why is Harbor so bad and what hopefully will Riot do to fix him. Let's start off with that first question. Why is Harbor so bad? What makes Harbor bad? Well, there's a few different things in my opinion, so let's talk about them. I think mostly the defense side is Harbor's big problem. One that, many people have talked about before, and I have talked about before on this channel, is that particularly on the defense side, if you want, if for instance you're over here towards B and an A exec is coming and you want to go and help your teammates, well, you might not be able to, because you cannot reach them, and you are limited in range somewhat with what you can do. So, particularly on defense side, particularly on potentially bigger maps as well, but really most maps, I would say, there's just certain positions where you're not really going to be able to do what should be your job on the defense side, which is helping your teammates out with the smoke. So that is kind of first problem, and you also kind of have the problem as well that, whenever you use the high tide, it also reveals, where you actually were. It reveals kind of where you are. You can work it out if you're the opponent there. Kind of the general direction of where that Harbor is coming from, which also isn't great. And again, compared to, basically every other controller in the game, that isn't a problem for them, but it is for Harbor. So that's kind of issue number one. Another problem with the high tide, though, is that it also makes playing certain positions very difficult. For instance, let's say I was, playing here C on Haven, and I'm jump peeking, and it's like, oh no, they are coming C, and I don't have a cascade for whatever reason, so I need to use my high tide instead. And so what? I'm doing something like this. But then if they get past this little part here, if they push me off this angle and I have to come back here and they come through the wall, well, now anyone who's coming to help me from garage, maybe, right? Anyone who's trying to flood in here, well, they can't help me, right? I've given them basically a little neon wall to cross the back site. And this is another problem that you can have with the high tide, is there are certain positions where it just is difficult to use effectively. So there's kind of certain positions as Harbor that you almost like can't really play, which again makes it quite difficult. And one of the things with Harbor that this means is he's very restricted. He's not very flexible. He's not good in a lot of situations, right? One of the things that makes Omen so good is that Omen is so good in like every situation that comes his way. You need to be aggressive, you need to get out, you have multiple options of how to do that and play that in different ways if you want to as well with Omen. With Harbor, it's like, well, if you want to be aggressive, you can't. If you want to kind of bunker things down, you can sort of, but if you only have certain abilities, if you only have your signature ability, yeah, it's not going to be easy. You better be good with the agent. And if you want to get out, you won't always have necessarily the easiest time either, right? So Harbor is just very limited in that kind of scope. Another problem, and this has been a problem for a long time, and I can't really believe that this is still in the game, is this. The fact that the wall slows teammates, how is that still in the game? This should have been changed literal years ago. Like literally 2 years ago they should have changed this, and they have had ample opportunity to change it at any time. Because obviously if you're a controller, it doesn't make sense to debuff teammates when your whole job is to smoke. You might need to run through a smoke. That happens in this game. It just doesn't make any sense, especially for the one controller who might end up with kind of janky smokes that especially you have to potentially run through, right? If I am defending C and doing this, and I am the teammate who's trying to flood in from here, I might need to do this. So why are you slowing me? Yeah, that definitely needs to change. And if that isn't one of the changes that they make, I'm going to heavily question what the hell they are doing. Your own team's smoke should not debuff you. Another problem that I don't really think people have really talked about nearly enough is that this Cove ability is kind of useless. Okay, this is something that we need to talk about. Because the Cove, well, I think is not only not that great of an ability, it's also very boring, right? In terms of the way that it gets used, in terms of, its use cases, what is 95% of the Cove uses? It's to plant the spike or to defuse the spike. One, that is just extremely dull. But two, you might not have thought about this, but ever since they changed how pings work in this game, let me ask you this question. When you're defusing the spike, would you rather have a cove or a normal smoke? Because now that they've changed how the pings work and you can't just ping the spike, this is one that you can shoot and it disappears. Other smokes don't disappear. So ever since they changed how the pings work and you can't just ping the spike all the time, I actually think a lot of the time, a normal smoke might actually be better than a cove. So, with that in mind, this ability is not only, you know, very hampered in terms of its use case, but also, for one of its main use cases, it maybe isn't even that good anymore. So, those are kind of the main things that I think, you know, make Harbor kind of bad. And now we'll talk about some of the leaks that have come out about maybe some of the changes and whether I think that they will be good changes. So when I say leaks, I don't mean like actual full leaks of what the, you know, changes are going to be, but we do have, you know, some kind of information that's been put out there. This is from Kanga's video. Shout out Kanga. If you don't know Kanga, go and subscribe to Kanga, because if you want to know anything about the kind of new things in the game, then Kanga is your place to be. But this is from his video when the devs were talking about, you know, the Harbor rework, and this is what I want to talk about. So a lot of Harbor's identity is still true, kind of this initiator-controller hybrid. Okay, so those are from the devs directly, that is kind of the direction that they want to go. Initiator controller hybrid. Keep that in your mind for potentially some of the things that might, you know, be changing. But then also we got this leak that Kangle will show in just a second as well, which is nice shot. Nice shot. Can we get the leak? Here we go. Play mage ability C splash grenade debuff loop. So this was kind of, you know, out there on Valo leaks here. It looks like the C and X ability. So the X is the ult and the C is the cascade, right? And you can see it's called Splash Grenade. That would kind of hint at maybe something a little bit different, but also the ult potentially changing to something called Tidal Wave as well. And, you know, you can see that they potentially are giving little debuffs here to the opponent. So now let's talk about that and assume that that is true. So what that would kind of insinuate is that the cascade is changing to some sort of grenade, and that the ult is changing in some way as well. Now, I don't know exactly what they'll change it to, and I am going to speculate a little bit here, but I first just want to talk about, if they have changed the Cascade and not the Cove, I already think that they have made a gigantic mistake. Because the Cascade, I actually think it's a very interesting ability, and, you know, there are good use cases for it, and it is very useful, and the thing that the Cascade helps with Harbor is, like I'm saying, for this problem where if these people are rushing me down C long, you know, this high tide isn't a good option, you know, and it can be janky and not great. Well, the Cascade can get you out of those spots, right? Because a Cascade that does this, and I can just stop it right there, that's fine, right? And that's going to slow them as they come in as well. That's all good. If they remove this Cascade for something completely different, and I'm left with a Cove and a high tide, I don't want to Cove this. What, you're gonna, like, if I get pushed back off this angle, what, I'm gonna have to just guess some sort of Cove lineup to get this here? That's not very good, because what, like this, I'm likely to miss it, right? There's gonna maybe be gaps. I'm gonna potentially give them a way in of, like, getting past the choke point that I now also can't spam down here either. Like, using a Cove in that spot is not good. Only way that they could undo that is creating some kind of, like, mini-map mode for the high tide. Right, where it's similar to like a Brim or Clove smoke, you know, where a little mini-map pops up and you can like draw the line of where you want it, right? That's kind of the only like way that I could see that working. That would fix obviously the problem potentially of, you know, helping teammates across the map. It would fix, you know, this particular situation if they've got rid of the Cascade where certain positions become very difficult to play. So that would potentially fix a lot, and that would be a significant buff if they did that. So in one sense, if they do that, then that's fine. I've got no problem with that. That will fix kind of all of, you know, a decent amount of these problems that I've been talking about. But if they don't, and they keep the high tide kind of limited, you know, to where you're from, and they get rid of the Cascade, then we are in a lot of trouble. But let's talk about the ult as well, because I think when people saw that, oh, the ult might be changing, that people found that, and myself found that quite weird, because the ult's just good. Right, the ult feels like it's a good ult, it's good in pro, it's good in ranked, it's a good ult. I don't think anyone had any problems with it. It doesn't feel like overbearing, it doesn't feel like a problem. It just feels like one of the ults in the game that's perfectly fine and it feels pretty strong. So to change that would be quite weird. If you want my baseless speculation that is based on just random theories of one guy's mind, what is probably going to happen here is the ability that was, you know, leaked was called Tidal Wave. I just wonder if they think, let's give this water agent something that looks really cool as an ult, right? And what looks really cool? Well, maybe having some, like, imagine a cascade, but it's even bigger and it's a massive wave coming at you. That looks cool. Let's have that be the ult, right? Some massive wave coming at you. Stuns you, slows you, whatever, right? Because it looks cool and people will like that. But that means that they had to change the ult. But the other thing was called Splash Grenade. What if they changed the, you know, if it is the cascade going, what if they changed the cascade to be a grenade that does what the ult does, right? So you throw a grenade somewhere, you know, let's pretend the cove was a grenade. You throw the grenade somewhere, and if someone is there, like the ult, it, you know, lights up a little spark and it stuns them if they're there. Interesting. Now we've got that kind of initiator controller hybrid, right? That's an ability that stuns and it potentially reveals somewhat. It gives you some information as well. So it's initiator ability, which is what they kind of said, right? And the ult, as we said, was a perfectly fine ability. And that's how we kind of keep that ability in the game because we like that ability. But also we get to do something really cool where we create this massive tidal wave. It does whatever it might do. One, it would make the agent cooler. Two, it would kind of lean more into that initiator style that they talked about, of course, as well. And to me, like, it's the only real way I can see changing the ult making a ton of sense. Because, as I said, I think this ability is perfectly fine and fit well within the game already. So those are some of the things that I'm hoping that maybe get changed. One that absolutely needs changing is the debuff on the slow on allies. If they allow you to use the high tide, you know, away from yourself and it comes up with a little mini map that you can kind of draw on, that's great. That will fix a lot of Harbor's problem. If they don't do that and remove the cascade, this agent is in trouble. I still think that the cove is not a good ability. Like, it's not that useful as an ability in general. So I personally would prefer for that to change because I think it's uninteresting and not very good. But if they don't do that and do remove the cascade, then I'm a little bit more worried, particularly if they don't change and allow Harbor to smoke across the map.